Sorry about that. That's right. I have Zoom. Like me to do it again?
Sure. That'd be great.
Okay. I can do that. Okay. We are on. All right, we're gonna call the August 9th Tualatin, City of Tualatin Architectural Review Board meeting to order at 6:34 PM. And we're gonna start off by welcoming everyone here virtually and in person and start with our roll call. Thank you. Here.
Hi there, it's Lisa Kitchicho. I'm not sure if there's video on in the room. I don't see anyone. Can anyone else see them? I don't see video on.
No, me neither. Thank you for pointing that out. Barely hear them.
Kind of feels like Monday, doesn't it? Sometimes that happens. Twice in a week. Lisa, could you hear us? Could you test if we can hear you?
I can hear you. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we just can't see video in the room. That's
We're working on it. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
There we go. Thumbs up. Can see us now?
Gotcha.
Thank you. Sure. Here.
Here.
So I'll jump in again. Sorry, I think you're calling roll. I can't hear any, but I heard someone say here at a faint, but I can't hear anyone calling roll at all.
Okay.
Try again. Maybe we should switch places.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, we're just doing roll call. So member Kika Chico, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong.
That's okay. Kitchicho present.
Thank you. Okay, I can believe that's everyone. All right, thank you, everyone. So we will move into announcements and communications, although are there any announcements or communications?
Nothing that's not on the agenda.
Okay, great, thank you. Approval of minutes.
Well, they've all been issued, so do we need a motion? Is that what we're looking for?
Sorry, yeah.
So let's see, because that last meeting was,
Could you help us with the date of the last meeting, please?
Date of the last meeting.
So, because that would be the minutes we would want to reference in the motion, yes?
Minutes, well, there's 6.
so you want them all as one motion?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
Unless there are changes.
changes, yeah. Well, I will start off with a motion to approve the board minutes from 2022 and to today's date, 2023.
I'll second it.
And who was that seconded it?
Pat Gaynor?
Thank you, Pat. Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we accept the minutes or approve the minutes, excuse me, for the year of 2022 and through August of 2023. All in favor of this motion will signify by aye during the roll call. Chair Hillier, aye. Member Stanaway,
Aye.
member Lisa,
Hitracho, aye.
Thank you. I'm gonna get that. Member Gaynor,
Aye.
who else do we have there? Member Reeves?
Just,
Nope.
just the four of you.
Nope, okay. All right, this motion carries. Thank you. I don't know that we have any communications from the public.
Nope.
Oh, okay, so action items. I think we're headed straight to action items. So consideration of a one-year extension request of the Architectural Review Board decision dated March 14th, 2022 for the proposed Tualatin Logistics Park development, case file AR 21-0011. The project proposed to construct an approximately 452,800 square foot multi-tenant distribution warehouse on a 24.16 acre site located in the General Manufacturing or MG district at 20400 Southwest Seapold Road, tax lot 2S128A000100.
I'll just have you read through the script, starting at item 3. We've already called to order and approved the minutes.
So the communications from the public.
The script,
Number 4.
Or public hearing. So the Architectural Review Board then asks questions of staff, the applicant, or any member of the public who testified. Okay,
Thank you. Yeah, that script is, yeah, that's the specificity.
we'll just
the legal beagle stuff.
Mhm.
pause for a moment.
Okay. We're pausing for a water refill.
That's
right.
right.
Okay. Public hearing. The public hearing on an application for an architectural review AR 21-0011 to allow for development of an approximately 452,800 square foot industrial building known as Tualatin Logistics Park, submitted by Amy Talent of VLMK Engineering and Design for proprietary for property located at 20400 Southwest Seapole Road is called to order. So the public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. We'll have a staff report, entry of additional correspondence received into the record, questions by the Architectural Review Board or staff of staff, opening the public hearing for testimony in the following order: the applicant or applicant's representative, proponents, neutral testimony, opponents, rebuttals by applicant or representative, closing of the public hearing. No other comments will be heard from the public or the applicant unless a question is asked by the Architectural Review Board. Questions of staff, if any, by the Architectural Review Board. Discussion of the Architectural Review Board. A decision may be made by the Architectural Review Board at the close of the hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain in the future. If the matter is reset to a time and date certain in the future, this will be the only notice of that date you receive. So we'll start with the staff report.
It's being shared.
Thank you. And while Madeline's queuing that up, just quickly to introduce Madeline. Madeline is a relatively new, although not terribly new at this point, assistant planner with the city. She's been here a bit over a year now, but this is her first time presenting before you as the board. So please join me in welcoming her.
Welcome. Thank you, Steve. I'm happy to be here this evening. I will be conducting the staff presentation for the Tualatin Logistics Park extension request, otherwise known as Architectural Review 2111, which is located at 2400 Southwest Sipel Road. VLMK Engineering and Design, on behalf of Foresight Balboa, requests an extension of the Architectural Review Board decision dated March 14th, 2022 for the proposed Tualatin Logistics Park development, case file AR 2111. The applicant requests to extend the decision through March 14th of 2025. The 24.16 acre site is located in the General Manufacturing Planning District. The site's current use is a driving range and miniature golf course occupied by Tualatin Island Greens. Architectural Review 2111 approved a 452,000 square foot industrial building for the intended use of manufacturing and warehouse. This project also approved 197 parking stalls, 4 loading berths, and 115 loading docks. Architectural Review 2111 was reviewed against the criteria found in the Tualatin Development Code in chapters 73A through 73G, 74, and 75. These sections included tree removal, site design, landscaping, and parking standards, as well as waste and recyclable management standards. At the time of approval, public improvements and access management were also reviewed. The Tualatin Logistics Park project was adopted with conditions of approval on March 14th, 2022, and this decision was included in Exhibit E1 of the agenda packet.
Okay, do we have any additional correspondence to be received for the record?
I'm gonna.
Oh, you're going.
I'm so
Oh, I'm so sorry.
My
You paused and I moved. Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to go back.
Sorry.
I wondered more.
Thank you. Tualatin Development Code Section 3320 provides provision regarding permit expiration. Architectural review decisions expire 2 years from the effective date unless the applicant has received a building or grading permit, substantial construction has occurred pursuant to the building permit, and an inspection has been performed by a member of the building division. The effective date of Architectural Review 2111 was on March 14th, 2022, meaning that without a grant of an extension request, the decision will expire on March 14th of 2024. This slide provides an overview of the procedures of the Type 3 Architectural Review Extension Request. An architectural review approval may be extended if the applicant submits a written request for an extension of time within 2 years of the effective date. The applicant has submitted a formal request on July 6, 2023. If the Architectural Review Board approved the architectural review, then the ARB will decide the extension request under the Type 3 quasi-judicial procedures, which is what we're doing this evening at the August 9th hearing. The city must provide notice of the extension request to the past recipients of the architectural review, and the applicant must post signage to the site. City staff provided notice on July 17th, and the applicant team has proposed signage to the site. TDC 3320 also provides the approval criteria for an extension request. The Architectural Review Board may grant the extension of time upon finding the following approval criteria are met. And in the following slides, we'll walk through each of the approval criteria in relation to the Tualatin Logistics Park project. Approval criteria 1 states that the applicant must submit written extension requests prior to the expiration date. As we've discussed, the applicant submitted a written request on July 6th, which is ahead of the March 14th, 2024 expiration date. Approval criteria 2 states that there must be no significant changes in conditions, ordinances, regulations, or standards of the city or applicable agencies that would affect the previously approved project so as to warrant its resubmittal for an architectural review. The applicant stated that VLMK Engineering and Design, as well as Lancaster Mobley, reviewed the Tualatin Development Code, Clean Water Services Design and Construction Standards, in addition to traffic-related codes and regulations, and stated the project remains in compliance with each. City staff has also compared AR 2111's decision to the current Tualatin Development Code and have not noted any significant changes in the city's conditions, ordinances, and regulations. The applicable agencies were noticed on July 17th, 2023. Clean Water Services actually did comment on this project and stated they have no comment or apprehensions on this request moving forward. Approval criteria 3 states that if the previously approved application included a special study, the applicant must provide a report that includes a letter from a recognized professional that states the conditions have not changed after the original approval and that no new study is warranted. The applicant did provide a memorandum from Lancaster Mobley on the transportation impact analysis that was completed on December 15th of 2021. This memorandum outlined the original assumptions, findings, and changes since the report. The TIA for AR 2111 considered it build-out conditions several years beyond the completion date of the project construction. So the build-out year of 2025 would still be applicable within the request for extension. The memorandum also demonstrated the findings of the TIA are still applicable and that the conclusions that the study area can accommodate the project haven't changed. The memorandum concluded that there was no supplemental TIA analysis needed to accommodate the requested extension. The applicant also provided a letter stating that the CWS standards used for the design of Architectural Review 2111 that were enacted in November of 2019 are the same standards that are still currently in effect as of the date of this application. Finally, the last approval criteria states that if the site has been neglected so as to allow the site to become blighted, then the deciding party must factor this into its decision. The applicant has maintained the site with ongoing business operations by the Tualatin Island Greens Golf Center and Grill to ensure that blight did not become a factor, and that with condition of approval A4, this standard will be met. City staff proposed the following conditions of approval for this extension request. Condition A1 states that the extension can be no more than 1 single year. This decision will extend the expiration timeline by 1 year to March 14th, 2025. Condition A2 states the proposed extension must adhere to the conditions of the original decision of Architectural Review 2111. A3 states the proposed extension must comply with all applicable standards and objectives in Tualatin Development Code chapters 32 and 33. And lastly, condition A4 states the site must continue to not be neglected so as to allow the site to become blighted in accordance with TDC 3320-10E. In conclusion, the findings demonstrate that the request for extension meets the applicable criteria of the Tualatin Development Code with the recommended conditions of approval. And therefore, staff respectfully recommend the approval of the 1-year extension of Architectural Review 2111 for a revised expiration date of March 14th of 2025. And with that, that wraps up our staff presentation for this extension request. So if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
I just have a question. Has there been any discussion with the staff from the applicant regarding any of the conditions or, from the minutes or anything at all?
Not on my end. I haven't had any additional discussions regarding the conditions.
Not at this point, like the architectural feature stuff, no.
Any questions from anyone online?
This is Lisa, none from me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move into the entry of any additional correspondence that have been received for the record. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to questions by the Architectural Review Board of Staff. I believe we just decided that.
Mine.
We've done that. Opening the public hearing for testimony in the following order. Do we have the applicant or the applicant's representative here this evening?
We do, yes, and thank you guys for your time here this evening. My name is Tyler Reeves, representing the developer Spec Development, as well as the current landowner and our partner, Charlie Johnson. To give a little bit of background, and I think that most of you are aware of this at this point because of our application, but the basis for this extension request is really coming down to the capital structure of the deal in the current, really the climate and volatile capital markets that we're dealing with right now. And we believe that extending this or having the opportunity to extend to 2025 gives us a chance to really step back and navigate some of these markets here for the next 6 months and get a plan in place that we feel good about. This is a project that we've been at for a while now and that we feel strongly about and that we still do believe will be a success in the city of Tualatin when we do break ground and get this developed. So this is something that would be very beneficial to our overall project schedule and design process. And with that, please feel free to ask our other team members here of VLMK, Haviland Kemp, as well as Jennifer Danziger with Lancaster Mobley, our traffic engineer, any questions you may have. And on behalf of our developer and property owner, we respectfully request your consideration for extension in this matter. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? No questions? Okay. Are there any proponents that would like to speak for this application?
There's no one on the call or in the.
There, okay, I have no idea.
On
who
either
is.
side, other than the
So,
applicant and staff.
thank you. So I don't know how the legal things work, but is there neutral testimony? No. Opponents, no. Rebuttals, I feel like that probably leaves you in a position to not rebut anything. And so we'll close the public hearing and no other comments will now be heard. And I think we've cleared up any questions that we may have had. Now we'll move into discussion by the Architectural Review Board. Is there any discussion of the group? I feel like you've discussed it before. The group has, is there?
This is Lisa Kitchicho, none from me.
Thank you. Okay, I skipped a little bit.
Do we need a motion?
Yeah.
Should we just
So,
get to
yeah,
it?
I think we're just
Okay.
moving, like, there's, yes,
Moving through rapidly, because it's a very simple.
exactly. We're not gonna worry about ex parte, all the disclosures and such, because this seems pretty straightforward. So yes, I will entertain a motion.
Okay,
Okay,
well,
oh, go ahead, Skip.
no, that's right. I'll second this one. Go ahead.
Okay, I move to allow for the extension.
And I will second that.
Okay, it is moved by member Quinchenko and seconded by member Stanaway to allow for the extension. Is there any discussion on this motion? All in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. This motion carries. Okay, Thank you for your patience, everyone, with that process. And me in it. Okay, now we move into communication from city staff.
And so we have a informational presentation. for
Okay.
you. Is it open already, Aaron?
I am not able to get on our internet for whatever reason.
Okay, this is turned on. So it's from- Right. Mhm. Open. It's open. We're just waiting for it to upload right now. Yeah. Here.
All right, is everybody online able to hear me okay? Are you able to hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Erin Engman. I'm the senior planner here at the city of Tualatin. And tonight I'll be walking you through a new legislative amendment that we'll be showcasing to our city council on August 28th. They had asked that we bring this forward to the Architectural Review Board as a preview to let you know all of the work we've been working on. This project is called the Basalt Creek Employment Zone Project. The acronym is BCE. So for tonight's discussion, I'll walk through the project background and goals. I don't believe we'll be covering the urban renewal. I think that's a typo. I'll walk through our public outreach and give you a preview of what's in the Basalt Creek Employment Zone Code. And we'll walk through the Planning Commission recommendation for you. And this is just meant to be an informational topic because at some point in the future, this new zoning district might come before you for an Architectural Review Board decision. So for context, our project is in the Basalt Creek area. We've highlighted the project area, which is now designated Manufacturing Park Zone. So you'll see that in the MP zone designation. This area is essentially south of Helena Street and north of Basalt Creek Parkway. We have some wayfinding listed for you so you can see where the Autumn Sunrise and Plant Box Garden development is in relationship to this project area. And I wanted to give some context about why this project is being proposed. Essentially, we're looking to create a new zoning district, which would be an industrial zoning district for the Basalt Creek area. And we found that with our existing manufacturing park zone, it provides for a very narrow set of uses that are not supported by the current market trends. We look to our Leviton district, which is just to the west of us, where Lamb and Fujimi are, and found that while that district was initially successful, current development has tapered off and it still sits about 50% vacant, even though it has proximity to city services and infrastructure. So why is this project needed now? We're looking to have a catalyst for development to grow our tax base within the Basalt Creek area so that we can meet our urban renewal goals. And if we provide a more flexible zoning district, we can increase our TIF revenues potentially up to 13-fold. And how is this code created? We spent over a year studying economic and market trends while talking to our industrial stakeholder groups, the public, the Byram CEO groups, our city council, and this has also been previewed by the Chamber of Commerce as well. Can we advance the slide, please? So when we first introduced this project to City Council in 2022, we were just directed to work on this legislative amendment to update and modernize land uses and development standards in our manufacturing park zone for the Basalt Creek area. As part of this exercise, Council had directed staff to support employment and infrastructure goals that were identified in our adopted Basalt Creek Concept Plan, Economic Opportunities Analysis, and Southwest and Basalt Creek Development Area. So these planning documents have been a culmination of over a decade's worth of work, and they have some good things in them. So we're looking to build that into this zone. And specifically, we're looking to limit warehousing uses to support job density. That will encourage a flexible tenant space, building pro forma or development situation. We're hoping to also provide some allowances for commercial uses to kind of, sorry, I'm all kind of confused and tongue-tied right now. I think I'm just tired, but we're looking to incorporate commercial uses so that we have potentially tenant spaces available to our neighbors and these industrial tenants that will be going in. And we are looking to maintain a landscape feel to provide a nice interface between the residential area to the north. So as you can see, the manufacturing park zone that I mentioned previously has a very narrow subset of industrial uses, which is limited to light manufacturing and specifically uses that encourage large-scale manufacturing and research facilities. And as I mentioned, we've had extensive public outreach over the course of the year. As you can see on this slide, there's been numerous touch points with various members of public and stakeholder groups. And what we learned is that the public and residents express that road construction and maintenance should keep pace with the increased industrial traffic, that uses should be conducted in a completely enclosed building to mitigate for any noise or potential pollution concerns, and that landscape buffers should be used to separate the industrial uses from the residential areas to provide for a nice public interface. And they asked that the city should encourage uses that provide high-wage jobs and support commercial uses that can be patronized by the nearby residents. And then from what we've heard from our industrial developers and brokers is that flexible tenant space or spec development has replaced owner-occupied and purpose-built development, and that development driven by the tenant model requires greater flexibility to not only ensure tenant occupancy, but most importantly, to secure capital for construction. And that many tenants require on-site warehousing and wholesale sales to support operations. And this kind of supports the whole idea of industrial co-location, how when you have these very uses on the same development site, it kind of generates a very entrepreneurial hub and they support each other. So with all of these ideas in mind, we use these as guiding principles for our Basalt Creek employment zone, taking into account the council's direction to support job density and high wage jobs, the economic analysis to remain flexible with the tenant uses and spaces, public feedback to have that nice public buffer and interface, stakeholder feedback for the flexibility, again, for their financial viability, and the Planning Commission direction to incorporate design standards, which we'll walk through tonight to ensure that we get the quality development that we're hoping for. I just wanted to start too with our purpose statement for the Basalt Creek Employment Zone to give you a flavor for what it is. And that purpose is to provide an environment conducive to the development and protection of employment uses that contribute to the local economy and support nearby residential uses. And these ellipses talk about how it'll mitigate for any impacts that would be detrimental to public health and safety. The emphasis of the zone is on providing a variety of manufacturing, office, and incubator space for established and emerging businesses, typically in a flex space development pattern. Commercial uses are allowed but limited in intensity to maintain adequate employment development opportunities. And now we'll kind of dive into some of these development standards that are going to be within this code that we'll take to City Council. One being a landscape buffer adjacent to residential uses. And the idea for this buffer is that you'll have a menu of options. So when you're looking at the increased buffer width, the landscaping options would be less required or less mitigative. And then as you look to narrow that width, we'll be asking for a wall as an additional form of mitigation. We have an illustration here that shows you what the 15-foot buffer would look like on the menu with the fence and then the additional landscaping that's required. We're also asking that if any fences are proposed adjacent to the public right-of-way, that we're encouraging decorative fencing. However, if open fencing like chain link or wrought iron fencing is proposed, we're asking that it be screened from the public right-of-way by landscaping. And we're asking that this landscaping be all seasons, so broadleaf evergreen shrubs would be appropriate so that it will form a 4-foot high continuous screen within 2 years of planting. And we have a little example here that's from our Tualatin Service Center. And additionally, if there are any loading docks proposed adjacent to the residential areas, we'll require that a sound barrier construction be built into the site. Typically, we don't see these often. Generally, developers choose to make these loading berths internal to their site, so they're not really adjacent to any public-facing uses. But we just put this in here as a mitigative measure in case we have a constrained site or for whatever reason. And then we have included some building design standards, which are above what we typically include for industrial uses. So we'll be looking for primary and secondary facades that have quality architectural materials, and we give examples of what those would be. When we say primary facades, those would be the facades that front the public right-of-way or the residential areas. And then the secondary facades would be more internal to the site. So we're thinking maybe the rear of the buildings. We do have standards too for exterior colors, mainly that they be earth tone shades so that we don't get anything too loud or too colorful, and that the contrast between the trim and the mortar be somewhat moderate. If the developers choose to propose a second story or greater, this zone would allow up to 45 feet, so approximately 4 stories. So we're asking for a distinction for those upper floors. And then if a building is greater than 3 stories, we're asking that the 4th story be stepped back to create a friendlier public-facing facade. And of course, we'll be sure to screen any mechanical equipment on the site through standards as well. And I just wanted to share a few examples of what these development standards would look like once they're constructed. And to kind of round it out, our landscape standards would be 20% for this new Basalt Creek Employment Zone. It's kind of a happy medium between our industrial zones, which are typically 15%, and our more industrial park zones, which have a higher percentage of 25%. The idea being that some of the sites in the Basalt Creek area are a bit smaller, and there's no guarantee that they will combine for a larger holding. So we just wanted to provide some flexibility for some of those more constrained sites. We're also looking to update some functional classifications of our roadways for Tonquin Loop and 112th Avenue. The idea being that it would kind of separate some of the residential traffic from the industrial traffic. And with that, it would kick up our masonry fence standards for the residential development adjacent to this industrial site. So that way you kind of get more of a mitigative measure too between the two different zones. And we've taken our draft code to the Planning Commission 3 different times, and they've made substantial edits over the course of the project. We've gotten some great feedback from them. And the current draft code that we've shared with you tonight has received unanimous recommendation and support from our Planning Commission. And like I mentioned before, it will be going before our City Council August 28th. With that, I'll wrap it up for any questions that you might have of staff.
Thanks, Aaron. I have a question. Can you go back to the isometric view of the landscape buffer in the presentation?
Sure, we're going to open the presentation right now and navigate back there for you.
Thanks. I just want to have it on the screen so everyone else can see. I ran into this on working in Portland a few years back when I was abutting residential developments, existing residential developments with new commercial infill, and the city was adamant about putting the shrubs and ground cover layers on the residential side of the fence in an effort to soften that feel of a contiguous barrier and kind of step up the enhancement in that area. You know, with the trees and stuff behind the fence on the actual developed property, just so that there was less canopy convergence with anybody's residential trees. And so I'm looking at that graphic and wondering if maybe there is this iteration that works for, you know, predominant amount of, you know, spaces where we abut, but that maybe we flip that ground treatment layer to the outside of the fence in an effort to ground that fence to not create such a physical barrier where we might be sidewalk tight or some other constraint on that edge. Just thinking that having some flexibility in what that looks like and how that's placed might help to enhance those landscape areas in between developments. Just a thought, just a passing thought on how that could have another piece of trace over it, or maybe just an alternate idea that still allows for all of those elements to happen along the frontage or the boundary line.
Thank you for those points, Board Gainer. Is this the slide that you were talking about, or is it more the
That's it,
masonry
yeah.
wall?
Yeah, you can see how the fence is kind of on the outside. If that fence, you know, was on this side of the shrubs, in between the shrubs and the trees, it would create kind of this green layer on the outside of the fence where you could have your intermediate shrub layers, your evergreen shrub layers, your ground cover treatments, so that, you know, whatever you're butting up against has, it's not just a barrier. I don't know. It's a thought. I don't know how often we'll be running, you know, commercial or industrial development right up against a residential house, but it may go a long way with the neighborhood associations and other things if there's options for the designer.
Okay. And maybe it might be helpful to clarify, this is what it would look like on the industrial properties as a further mitigative buffer adjacent to the residential areas. So the full picture would be a fence, landscaping, right away, and then on the other side would be some landscaping, and then the masonry fence, and then the residential zone.
Okay. Sometimes the fences and the vertical elements just create such a sharp edge and a barrier that it's often, you know, what people have to look at. So I want to make sure what
Okay.
people are looking at, you know, is pleasing.
Great, thank you. We'll take
If
that in.
it can be accommodated, if you can accommodate it, great. If not, I get it. So anyway, just a thought.
Appreciate your comments.
Yeah, well, the 15 feet is a minimal. I mean, that's a very minimum dimension. It's difficult to do anything in 15 feet. So, so that's why, it's the landscape is important to just have the layering, so we take full advantage of that 15 feet to help kind of break that up. Because if you looked at that scale wise, the hedge or shrubs, against that wall, you really only, even scale there is only probably a foot or 2 feet at the most. So anyway, that's why landscaping is so important when we're dealing with any kind of vertical structure. So.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that in this particular district, that there's only one area where residential and industrial property actually abut. It's generally separated by Tonkin Loop Road. So it's not necessarily, this interface is unusual and not typical for the district. So it'll still require screening on the industrial property despite the intervening right of way. And then on Tonkin Loop Road, then the residential properties will build their masonry wall on their side and then landscape in the rear yards of the homes, and then the homes will be located further up. And so it's like many layers removed.
Yeah. Since you have that up, could you go back to where you talked about, well, what I wanted to bring forward was, I know it talks about the buildings themselves, but there was nothing really descriptive as far as, again, the goal is to break down the scale of the building. So when we talk about materials, we should also, I feel, talk about using architectural methods to break down the scale of the buildings. Because we talk greatly about the materials to be used, but nothing about the scale.
Yeah.
Breaking down the scale.
I think that, and I don't know, Aaron, do you know, is the maximum setback provision still in there, or did that go, like, where it requires a certain amount of the building to be on the street frontage for commercial buildings?
So we do have street frontage on Grams Ferry Road for any commercial use, so that provision still stands. And then from what we've heard from our industrial stakeholders is that with these flexible development formats, with all the different tenant spaces and the different storefronts, that tends to break up some of the mass and the scale. But I see what you're saying too, in addition to that.
Well, to me, it should be part of the criteria, just like material is.
Yeah, and I'll share that in studying it, we base these code provisions on a comparative analysis of other jurisdictions, and one that we relied heavily on is Happy Valley, and I worked to create those standards when I worked there, and then we saw buildings successfully built under those standards, and so it seemed like a good model to base them on, because a lot of other jurisdictions lack industrial design standards. I'll say that we kind of struggled to find any good examples of complex massing and how to in the industrial context. It just felt like there was a lot of need to build boxes in industrial districts, and so that you end up basically wormholing your way into exceptions out of the things that actually have teeth. And so we just kind of, especially given that we have a fairly involved development stakeholder community in this project, which is unusual, and kind of testing some of the ideas like that with them, didn't really, I think where we got to felt agreeable, but I'll say that we considered that idea, and we more so focused it on the commercial development, like having, like Aaron's saying, we have a minimum street setback and a maximum, so that kind of encourages massing by, you have to have a certain percentage of the building meeting the minimum setback.
Sure.
And so forth. But industrial, we just have struggled to figure out how to build the mousetrap that ensures that people do some. And I mean, you build your building, and in your time here on the board, you've struggled with that, with the development that we've seen.
Yeah, well, and it's not necessarily all in massing. What it is, it's ways to break down that massing.
Yeah.
And it can be done by, the typical way is is the different paints
Yep.
and the reveals. Okay, that's kind of the standard, but there's more creative ways to do that. You can do that with landscape. You know, you can do landscape. Normally, you know, the landscape you see just is parallel with the building. Well, set columns or, you know, columnar type landscape that is perpendicular, because that just alone, as they grow, will break down that scale. You know, landscape is a great way. It can be elements on the building. It can be, you know, just different creative ways so that you don't have a solid wall in what you typically see in industrial buildings. And it's really just creativity. There's not a lot of additional cost. It can actually speed up construction if you find ways to make it easier for the contractor to do this work, but just be creative in how you break down that huge, massive wall. And
Yeah, and I guess I'll just share, I think that, you know, there's more, so this is the first district in the city that has any design standards. And so one observation is that we're dipping a toe into this. We're not jumping headlong. And so I think there's room for improvement. The second is that we just struggle to come up with, like, if you have a reveal or if you have a variation in facade, how many linear, is, you know, normally that's how it's done in other like commercial or residential design standards, is you specify like how often it should be.
Sure.
And we
Well,
struggle to find any examples of code that provided that.
well, and I guess what I was thinking, you know, we've always talked about the fact that the burden of proof is the applicant has to provide the burden of proof.
Whether they met the standards.
Or they've met the standards, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so then it just depends on how detailed do those standards have to be. So I guess the question is can you have basically a very, it's really just to me more of an awareness. And so it's just the fact that we are concerned in our community about the breakdown of scale of large buildings. So applicant, what are you doing to break down that scale? And that's all it has, and in my mind, that's all it has to say. Then the burden of proof becomes upon the applicant on, have they addressed that? What are they proposing to break down that scale? Then it's up to the staff or architecture review to say, yes, they have, or no, they have not. Additional work is needed. You know, can we be broad enough to where at least they have to provide the solution, not just a cookie cutter, check the box, yes, they have done this?
I mean, the simple answer is probably not, because if you don't provide a standard, if you don't provide how many, you know, that you need a reveal every 100 lineal feet or whatever, and you say that you need to do something to do, you know, to provide this. Well, does it have to be each fronted? Does it have to be each building facade? Yes or no? Then you're starting in designing standards. And so is one enough? Well, they've said they met the standard because there's no standard. And what do we have to push back on that, other than to say, well, you did something? It's not good. We can't necessarily deny someone if we don't specify how much, the degree by which it should be done. We can't deny it on the basis of them doing a minimal amount of effort. That's the struggle. And that's why this idea that we need to come up with like actual objective criteria by which to, like, safe harbors, where it's like, sure, if you do more, great, you designed a beautiful building, but we need you to do at least this many. Sure. And
Well, yeah. Well, right now, all we have is, you know, the code now says, well, it needs to be compatible with adjacent buildings. Okay, well,
and that still exists.
Right.
That's overlaid on top of it.
and so that's the only, right now, as far as dealing with scale, that's the only criteria there is. Now, in a lot of cases, that can be enough, because there are some buildings where there has been some attempt to break down that scale, frankly, because this board has pushed it enough to where, you know, there's awareness of it. And so, yes, it becomes a very, it's not prescriptive, because if prescriptive, then every building looks the same, and that's not what we want. We want that diversity. We want the diversity in materials. We want the diversity in the scale. We want it to be more of a pedestrian type scaled. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to break it down so it becomes more pedestrian type scale. And you can't do that, in my opinion, you cannot do that with a prescriptive method. There has to be it's all based upon the site conditions. It's based upon what the building is proposed to be, the slope, the topography, all those kind of elements come into play. And so it is a very, it's not prescriptive. It's one of those to where it's a discretionary kind of opinion of the review board.
Yeah, and it's easier for the ARB than staff. Where, you have more leeway to have a conversation, whereas for us,
Well,
the majority, as you'll see from our next presentation, the majority of our architectural reviews in the past however many years have been staff level, and so that's also where I'll just share my experiences that the best are like prescriptive plus discretionary, that's the best, where it's like you tell them what to do, and then if there's extenuating site conditions, you allow an exception, and then that requires them to basically justify the exception as being functionally equivalent to what was prescriptively required. But again, that was where we struggled, is we just couldn't find anything good. I think we can certainly sharpen our pencils and go back and look. I remember our discussion around the landscaping with the buildings that are between Miscellany and Tualatin Sherwood Road, softening lighting, and so we can take a look at some, at least criteria that push than we have in the code.
yeah, well, even if it's just a goal, it's part of the goal is to,
Sure.
have architectural buildings that are sensitive to this, their scale and their size, with the goal of breaking that scale down to a more pedestrian type scale. Again, that's just off the cuff as far as how to word something, but that's the goal. That's what we're always trying for. So that we don't have these big, huge buildings. And if done right, you can have bigger buildings that by breaking the scale down don't appear as such. And so when the neighbors look at them, they don't think, oh my God, it's just this big, huge box. There's ways to break it down. And so it becomes, like I said, it becomes more of an awareness, and for the applicant to really prove to us that they did take that into account, and what did they do?
Seems kind of like a culture change in a way, when you're building something in Tualatin. This is the culture of who we are and what we expect. And it sounds like this board has done a pretty good job over time of creating those conversations and engaging in them.
Yeah,
Trying to.
Well, clearly, yeah.
I appreciate it.
And this is Lisa Kitcherchow. So these design standards are clearly new. You've done all your research, your market trends, right? You got the opinion of others. But is there, within that framework that you developed this, did you build any type of measurement or sustainability model where you can go back after X period of time to modify or amend those standards, given, right, the outcomes of those buildings? Because it's not the end all be all. Clearly, right, you've developed a framework where modifications can happen based on, the outcomes of those structures. Is that
Right.
making sense? Sorry, am I not asking the question the right way?
No, I understand you, and I think if we find that we're not getting the development we hope for, we could always revisit our development standards through a plan text amendment and another legislative action to try to fine tune it and move the needle in a different direction.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go. As long as there's open to change, then it should work as intended and satisfy everyone who, has an opinion on it.
Thank you. Great comments, everyone. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Are there anyone else like to?
I have one more.
Yeah,
Sorry, I have one
excuse me.
more.
No, go for
Because
it.
I think of the key things that are always so important in any development is certainly the architectural, the sites, all those things. Lighting is very important. And I know the neighborhood, so when we talk about lighting, we don't want big, huge, light poles, which you typically see in larger development and industrial type. That's not what we want, especially adjoining neighbors. So again, that scale of the lighting, break this, the lighting should be a pedestrian scale lighting. And with good fixtures, you can do that with the light cutoffs, with the technology out there today. You don't have to have the 100-foot pole to light a site. You don't have to do that. And then, well, it's good to see that the landscape, is, or at least the landscape area is, the 20%, which is great. And then, well, we know developers always, they do majority of the time, it's the minimum landscape and open space or green space is always the minimum because they want to maximize their return on investment. So again, at least, just to reinforce that as a goal that, Tualatin is the tree city. And that should be reinforced in any development that we have.
I'll just share, we did a somewhat unscientific, admittedly, review of it, found that on larger sites, predominantly developers over landscape. And that, as Aaron kind of pointed out in the presentation, the intent of providing a middle ground was to allow for smaller sites that had more constraints, to your point about development, but that the larger sites do tend to develop over the maximum, just because there's only so much building a site can justify when you have all the other pieces of it. Especially because parking lot landscaping is a large amount of the overall site and required at a fairly large amount in Tualatin's existing code. And so that's one of the reasons that really it tends to go over, is that large developments provide a lot of parking, and so they end up going over the maximum as a result.
The other thing that I guess I'm seeing too in any kind of development is, because the developer is looking to do their full ROI, is that having detention, detention ponds and treatment ponds, that's disappearing. So what at one point in time was natural kind of areas now is not. It's all filters and tanks under the asphalt. So how is that being addressed?
Can you say, how is it being addressed as far as
This development? I mean, do we have any say in that, or is it all clean water service based, or what?
It's primarily clean water services standards. I mean, in general, the Clean Water Services Code prioritizes infiltration as the first method. On-site infiltration is the first method of stormwater treatment and dispersal, I guess. Obviously, with there being clay soils in a lot of the area, and of course this area being the basalt creek, we're expecting that not a ton of soils are going to have a high infiltration rate potentially.
Oh, okay.
Although some above the basalt layer may have actually, sandy alluvial soils, consistent with it being an ice age area that created it. So it's possible, but I mean, the underground detention facility is a little bit newer here. I mean, as far as the overall area, there's not anticipated to be regional stormwater detention facilities, like large combined city owned and maintained facilities. And so by and large, most of the stormwater detention is going to be privately treated on the site. And essentially, like, the standard is that you have to account for all new impervious surface, and then the stormwater that leaves the site can't exceed the rate that it left the site pre-development. You're probably familiar with that. And so, I mean, yes, I think that that's a trend that we're seeing more and more, is the under the parking lot type of detention facilities. They're expensive. And so if land is available, I think that developers prefer to use them. In my experience, I've seen those more so in commercial than industrial. Sites where space is more of at a premium. And it's worthwhile to do it underground. But overall, there's nothing, I guess, in our code, if this is the question you're going to, that precludes that as opposed to having like a traditional stormwater detention pond.
Okay.
And there's probably some reasons for that being more desirable, I guess, in some ways, and in other ways not.
Yeah, I've never had that discussion. I've not had that discussion with clean water, but you know, it's like anytime you create something mechanical for a long-term solution.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say
Difficult.
in general, they don't favor mechanical.
Well, it
solutions
is.
In general,
Yeah.
that's kind of their starting point, but I think they have, I mean, like everyone does, they have exception language, right? So, I mean, you have to try to infiltrate first. If you can't infiltrate, then you have to go to the public stormwater system, and then if there leaves no other option. And so, of course, TLP was one of those examples, right, where some of the site is going to do on-site infiltration, and then some of it is going to be mechanical, and then other of it, I think, is going to go by gravity to the city's stormwater system.
Yeah, so you're right. It's all on the perk rate of the site. And so that leads you to other options. And I don't know, was that an option? On the item that we just did the extension on?
Part of it, yes.
Okay,
But that was kind of I won't bore you with the details, but complicated based on the like finished floor elevation of the site and where basically where the rain drains drain to. And so gravity wasn't possible from all four corners of the site.
okay. Well, my observations, I guess.
No, good stuff. Thank you. As always. And then just last little item.
Wait, before we move on, I have a question about the landscape. If we're gonna be looking at underground systems, that was the primary source of like the landscape area calculation, historically, is these stormwater facilities because they're open contiguous landscape. They qualify for site landscape. If we give the option for underground systems, then that frees up that 20% to be more constructed or focused landscape and not necessarily the 10-foot band around the outside. I'm wondering if there's a mechanism in place to create meaningful interior landscape spaces or incentivizing that as far as potentially, and I've seen code reductions for plaza spaces or inclusive spaces being integrated into the landscape, especially if you're going to be creating employment opportunities. We want that landscape to have value, not only for the community, but for the employees as far as their balance of work and life, which I think is super critical these days. So I just want to raise the question of quality of employees' life and the quality of landscape and how those two are interconnected, and possibly put in a position where they're an attraction for developers. Anyway, just a thought.
That's an interesting point. I'm familiar with there being a concept of like, particularly in office settings, like minimum, I guess, like break area requirements. Kind of similar to like landscaping per unit of housing or like play area per unit of housing. We have that for like apartment complexes. And I'm familiar with that for like offices. Like you might have a certain square footage per 1,000 square foot of offices. Don't know that I've ever seen it for industrial per se, but I think it's definitely something that is like an excellent point. And I'll also share, I guess, to your point, board member Gaynor, I think that our parks department is in particular looking to try to help with that issue by creating like walking trails and park spaces and kind of a complete like loop, if you will, that ultimately joins up with the Tonkin Ice Age Trail in order to also provide that amenity to the employees, like you mentioned.
Yeah, that interconnectivity is critical. Getting out and being able to move. Just having that option puts it on the table for people where it may not have been before. So I feel like there may be some way to have the developers create those interlinks on their properties, and then it creates something bigger for the community at the end. That's a great start. I'd love to see where that goes.
Yeah. And the one thing to add, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I guess within my time here at the city, park system development charges, which were not previously levied on commercial and industrial development, are now. So they also help contribute to the future park system. And so when we think about this idea of these code amendments, some of which are trade-offs to incentivize development, you know, the question becomes, what does the city get in return out of it? And so, of course, the catalyst to assist with collection of urban renewal monies to fund important projects in the urban renewal area specifically, but also, you know, transportation system development charges, park system development charges, to help fund those system improvements too, are something that is also part of the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. But I've also found that paying into credit systems doesn't give you the resource you need right there in the community. It ends up getting put into a bank or a system for global implementation, which may be okay, but you're still not getting that site-specific amenity. So I feel like it's a careful balance between, you know, paying into a fund and actually producing the amenity. Or maybe there's a way to use the funds that are generated to offset costs so that developers are actually do it with their project rather than, you know, lean on the credit to be able to buy in. You know, wetlands being the number one thing I think we're paying down the road rather than enhancing and rehabilitating. So I don't want to see it end up like that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think specific to this district, just as an example, you know, our master plans call for a trail on this side being the west side of Basalt Creek Canyon along the industrial properties. And so an example might be parks acquiring or having the developer build segments of that trail in exchange for system development charge credits. And so that would be an example of what you're talking about, the ability to leverage that system for local benefit.
I think that's perfect. That'd be a perfect way to break that cycle. Great. Thanks for the input. Appreciate the backstory.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. So move on to point 2, update on previous projects or future action items, or both.
Yeah, this is our land use projects update, and I'm gonna make it a little bigger. Okay, and so I believe this is at the request of board member Stanaway.
Right,
Just
an
a
update.
quick recap update. As of now, summer 2023 projects approved. I went back to 2020. So we have Herman Road Industrial just down the street from this site, which is number 1 on the map, which, as you probably know from driving by here, is under construction and nearly complete. Just an FYI for you all also that Herman Road at that approximate location is going to be closed starting Thursday, August 17th, through September 10th, which is Sunday, for road construction for completion of a city project, which is going to add some sidewalks and bike lanes and stormwater improvements to that. kind of missing segment of Herman Road that if you've ever seen anyone out on a bike there, you say a little prayer for them, right? So
Scooters.
the detour is going to be via Tualatin Road for that time. So just in case you happen to be in the area. Number 2 is Tualatin Logistics Parks. That's over here, 124th south of Herman, number 2, where I'm highlighting the cursor. So that we just had time extension tonight, and we heard some optimism from the development team that capital markets will straighten up and provide fertile conditions for the ultimate development of that facility. Number 3, we have Planbeck Gardens, which is down in the Basalt Creek area, just off of Boone's Ferry Road. So that had its groundbreaking for site improvements somewhat recently. I was able to attend a really nice speech by the mayor and some other dignitaries, which was lovely. The project has not yet gone vertical, but it's probably pretty close to doing so at this point. And then we have number 4, so just adjacent to our site over here off Leviton and 108th, the Lamb office buildings. They've not begun. Do you know, Aaron, have they submitted for engineering plans?
Their office,
Yeah,
they are still, working through their engineering permitting
Okay.
and their building permits.
okay, so they're in process,
Mhm.
but the construction has not begun. And then number 5 tucks down at the intersection of Sagart, Martinazzi, and trying to blank on 3rd Street. Over by I-205 or I-5, excuse me, and 205. Number 5 there, that also has not begun. Not on the list, but just as an FYI, I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but we in late 2021, or was it late 2021, early 2022, we had the city council approve a zone change, an up zone for the Tualatin Heights Apartments, which is over on Sagart and 95th. We've been in conversations with them at the staff level about potential frontage and site improvements for that project. And so if it does result in an application, that will come before you as the architectural review board, but so that's a maybe. It may also not go forward, as we've heard, and quite frankly, as we're seeing in our department, we're not seeing a lot of new applications at this point. We're seeing a lot of people like finish off stuff that's already in process or do little stuff. It does seem like the capital markets are a little bit shell shocked right now. So
It seems like there was another one. It was because as I recall, there was a neighborhood meeting. And that's the one, the property that's just due east of, well, of the Tualatin Logistic Park. So due east of it, between like there's the one current development there that's,
so there's one that we have an application in for that's 124th on the other side, south of Semino. And that is languishing in what we call incomplete status. They have not
okay,
furnished all of their documentation. That is going to be, I think, based on the size of the buildings, a type 2? Or will
It'll
it
be
be
a
a
type
three?
3.
Oh, it will be. a
So
type
it'll
3.
come before you.
It will come before you, but
yeah, because that was a good year ago, so I just didn't.
yeah, that yeah, it's languished. It's been sitting with us since application, probably 4 or 5 months at this point. Something like that. So
Yeah.
who knows? We'll see if that moves forward or
About
not.
the only only undeveloped area, so.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is all I have for you. Any questions?
No, thank you. It's a good
You're welcome.
update, appreciate it.
Future action items.
That kind of covered it.
That's
Our-
excellent. I'm
Our
want to be sure.
speculative future action.
Yeah, right.
Wonderful. Okay. I still had pages left on my agenda, so I wanted to be
There you
sure
go.
that I wasn't cutting someone off again. Okay, are there any other words of wisdom or good of the order comments? Great, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
And moved and seconded that we adjourn, so be it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. It's nice to see your
Thanks.
pictures.